Welcome, everyone. My name is Seamus Ford. I'm Landmark's Director of Community Engagement, and you are attending another episode of Landmark Difference Makers. Today, we're going to be interviewing Jan McHenry, who's a Vietnam veteran, who's also a retired Landmark Forum leader, and he's dedicated himself to supporting fellow veterans in their journey of healing. Having experienced the challenges of reintegrating into civilian life himself, Jan supports other veterans in navigating the often overwhelming terrain of PTSD. With personal experience of the battles that don't end when the war is over, Jan is committed to ensuring veterans get the support, resources, and compassion that each of them deserves. And then we're also joined by Rod Wittmier, a U.S. Army veteran who, in response to the alarming statistics on veteran suicide, created a community event that brought veterans together that later evolved into an organization now known as the National Alliance to End Veteran Suicide. The organization's mission is to end veteran suicide through awareness, education, and support. And I must say, it really, really, really is a pleasure and a privilege to have you here. Really, thank you.
Thank you.
I had an opportunity to have a conversation with you, Jan, in preparation for this interview. And one of the things, you shared for me your experience coming back from Vietnam, having been in combat, and what that reintegration experience was like. And I'm hoping that you'd be willing to share a little bit of your own story just to create a background for what ultimately both of you are concerned for.
I was in combat in Vietnam. I was up on the DMZ in the Marine Corps. And we had quite a few battles. And then there was one specific one where there was 100 of us on a hill and 5 of us walked off. There were 23 killed that night, and others were wounded and had to be medevaced with lost arms and legs. And that left me with a lot of different things, a guilt and shame of living, and at the same time, my guilt and shame of not doing enough, and some of the other things that happened that night. Fortunately, just actually a month or so later, I was actually taken out of Vietnam. It was Nixon's first pullout, but most of the people that I was with were actually transferred to other divisions and other places, and there was a very few of us that actually left. I went to Okinawa, and I was there and actually I was in a group of people who most of them were not from Vietnam yet. They were actually there and then would be heading to Vietnam. And there was a really big difference between how I was reacting and how they were reacting. But I can remember people coming up behind me and then getting really loud, and the next minute or two, I'd find me choking them out. And I actually got sent to a psychiatrist, and he asked me to tell my story. Now, this is 1969, and things were a lot different back there with psychiatrists and stuff, but I told my story over and over and over, and he kept asking, well, okay, say it again. And then finally he just said, no wonder you're effed up. Here's some pills. And that was it. So I was on ship for a while, and then I came home. And again, it was a different time. And in 1969, there was a lot of battles to end the war. And of course, veterans were baby killers, and we were all kinds of different things. So yeah, I went into drugs, and it was pretty heavy. And I can remember one time waking up in a wheat field about 4 in the morning and had no clue on how I got there. It was about 80 miles away from Spokane. So, and then I actually hid that I was a veteran, because if I went to a party and somebody found out I was a veteran, there was a lot of beer getting thrown in my face and slapped, and called a baby killer. So it was a time where I just kind of hid. but I still would loud noises. I'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, and again, a lot of drugs. I got into it with a lot of my friends from Vietnam that were actually in high school with me, but went to Vietnam. And they were in different areas. And one of them actually lit himself on fire down in Denver because of all of his PTSD, and he wanted to end the war. So it was a difficult time for a lot of us. And I can actually see how people who come back from combat now and what they went through, they don't want to share it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to relive it. And that's one of the things in Operation Veteran Freedom. We don't want them to do that either. We just want to give them the tools to be free from the constraints of their past. Anyway, it was a interesting time. And again, I hit it. And but I was always dealing with it. Then I did a thing called the S training. And it was pretty woo-woo in the time. It's close your eyes, imagine this, try this, see about this, lay on your back, pretend you're here, whatever. But I came out of there and I was at peace. But I was still dealing with a lot of other things in my life. And then in the early 90s, I did a thing called the Landmark Forum because I knew what the S training did for me. And this was a offshoot of it or whatever. And I got all the tools and my life altered completely. There was freedom, but then I actually started producing all the results I wanted to produce in life. Like have a good job, making good money, doing a lot of other different things. Then I brought the Landmark Forum to Spokane, along with my former wife and some friends and family and my kids. And I started to be an introduction leader, program leader. And then I brought the Landmark Forum to Spokane, and then I started to become a seminar leader. And this is after when I did the Landmark Forum, after I got divorced from my former wife, but we're still good friends. That relationship is there. But then I got to be a seminar leader. I met another woman for my life, and then I became a Landmark Forum leader, and it was amazing. And one of the things that I wanted to do all that time is impact a lot of veterans who would show up in the Landmark Forum. And maybe I had a little bit too much attention on them sometimes. So, but it was amazing. And then I did that for quite 10 years or more or something, 12 years. I can't remember exactly. But at that time, I was also in talk to Rod, and he was talking about his SELP project. And I was still the Landmark Forum leader. And then I retired. I went home and I got in touch with Harry and Art Schreiber, who were at that time the leaders of the forum and Landmark Education, and got permission to use some of the distinctions. And I led a few programs here in Spokane, but then Rod and I got together because he had all of the boots on the ground, so to speak, in Tacoma and that area. And we ended up at JBLM prison, and it really just kind of took off. I think we've done over 84 different Operation Veteran Freedom workshops.
Mm.
And and I'm living a life that I never thought was possible, and experiencing the joy and the love that was never there before. So I want to give it away.
Mm. Well, I want to ask some questions about Operation Veteran Freedom, but I want to just introduce Rod into the conversation. And Rod, one thing that I think would be useful is there's really some just jaw-dropping statistics about suicide in the veteran community. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about what those circumstances.
Right. Happy to. I'll just go back in time. 2008 is when I attended the Landmark Forum with my wife, Linda, daughter, Jennifer. Jan McHenry led that forum. And that year we continued through our advanced course in self-expression leadership program. And I kind of first started thinking about homeless, teenagers, helping them. Then I stumbled upon the first statistic that the VA had ever put out. So this is September of 2008. And at that time, it was 18 veterans a day taking their lives. And that just hit me, just like, no way, that can't be possible. And I stood up and said, not in my country. And it's evolved from there. Current stat many use is 20 a day. It hit about 40 a day, but it was never publicly released. The reason it's down below 20 now is the VA is separated from Department of Defense. So what that means is the active duty numbers are no longer counted in veteran statistics, which I think is bullshit. Excuse my French. So anyway, so that's kind of the number that we deal with. And, I was honored to meet Jan, and, we kept talking and talking. And, once we were able to do the first Operation Veteran Freedom was 2014. I had, since the work I had done to create Vets Meet Vets, as it was called way back when, I had the idea that gray-haired, seasoned guys like us would meet younger, recent veterans and, be in community. And that was just, my SELP project was amazing. I could talk about that another time. And, but then going through it, we were able to then start the conversation and took it to the VA hospital. From there, I don't remember, Jan, if Aetna Insurance was next. We went to Hartford, Connecticut, and then colleges in Oregon. World athlete Michael McCastle's got like 5 world records, brought us, to his college, and that was pretty cool. And then we started really getting connected with Joint Base Lewis McChord.
War has been around since basically the beginning of recorded human history. And we have been sending our young people off to fight wars since the beginning of our country. And forgive me for people that are listening that aren't from the United States, but I think all civilizations have sent their young people off to war. And here in America, particularly since 9/11, there's probably, been very obvious public demonstrations of appreciation for the people who are currently serving in the military and to veterans as well. You can't go to a National Football League game without there being, a moment where veterans are honored. But in some ways, it's also a political football. It's also veterans are a prop, for other people's objectives. And if you look back at World War II, my grandfather served in World War II for the duration. They came home and had a different kind of experience, presumably because there was such a large cohort of people that had all served. Right. How is it different, since Vietnam through the Gulf Wars and Afghanistan and Iraq? What is different for a veteran coming home today who shows up in one of your workshops and perhaps somebody, who served all those years ago?
First comment I'll make is just the length of time in combat. If we go back to World War II or so, and even Vietnam, often it was a 1 year, right? 1 year commitment, then they could come home, or maybe they'd re-enlist. Since 9/11, we have people that have been on their 8th, 9th, 10th, being deployed, so that showed up when we did the military prison. Something my son had coined was hero to zero. he did some time in because of the drunk driving, and he got to see all of the service members that left Joint Base Lewis McChord's prison on their way to Leavenworth, the big prison, right? And what he would see is that they'd usually do something to get themselves justice involved because they'd been there 8 times and they knew that if they went again, they would not come home. So they would, do something to their sergeant major or, whatever, get in a fight and get booted out, so that they didn't have to go anymore. So that's, and when we let it there, we had one service member, if someone looks at our OVF page, you'll see it. It says, with 52 months of combat and all the therapy I've had, this workshop has done more than anything else I've ever had. So that's, so you can hear that length of time that they serve. Our human body is just not meant to sustain that much impact. Go ahead, Jan.
Well, Jan, just to repeat the question for you, actually, I want to ask it a little different of you. You came back in a time that famously there was almost the opposite of what the American public behaved almost the opposite of how they seem to behave today with veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're in a workshop with current veterans, I'm sure there's veterans from your era, what would you say is distinct about their experience? Rod talked about how many deployments the current people serving have been on. There's also something about just how few people in American society serve. You were in a time of the draft. Today, it's all volunteer. How do you see it?
It's, I don't know if there's that much difference between the experiences. I mean, there's your home. There's a lot of, even when I came home, there was a large group of people who hugged me and, took care of me and family like that. It was, you just didn't necessarily want to do it at a party because one person would get upset. So I think that the biggest thing is for the amount of people that are dealing with stuff, there's not enough people who are actually making sure that they're okay. Does that make sense?
Well, I think it does, but not to assume. When you say making sure they're okay, what might that look like?
Well, in my thing, it was actually hard to get into the VA when I came out. And I still think it might be. I think it's just something that there's not a lot of things out there like the National Alliance, really. I mean, there's some things that are, Rod's got 3 or 4 or 5 different things that he does, kart races, things like that. It's like building a community. I don't think that's necessarily, I think that's great. And I'd love to see every city have one, every place have one. Just because nobody knows what it's like to go through a war and deal with whatever you got to deal with, the loss of your best friends and the people that you were closest to, and just the experience of killing. I mean, that was one of my biggest ones, So I think when I came home, there was this world of black and white. You were either good for them, and then there were so many people that were against you. I think there's a lot more, thank you for your service. But you got food, you got a family, you got a job, you got something that you're dealing, that's not the question, And I think there's a lot of people out there suffering still. And I think that there's, I don't know how many are homeless.
Homeless people wouldn't necessarily even be part of a lot of the statistics.
Exactly.
Well, you talk about nobody knows what it's like to go through combat. Obviously true. Um, but we're in this odd time where the people, and I'll speak as an American in America right now, of a population of 300 million people, there's a million people that are in the armed services, and a significantly smaller portion of that experience combat.
Hmm.
And you talked earlier about them, people getting support. How Well, the one question I want to ask is how can somebody who hasn't had that experience support somebody who's had this singular experience, you said, of combat and killing, and especially people that had that happen at a young age, and now they're living the rest of their life after having had that experience. How can people who are, as I said, don't have that experience, have not had that experience, what is us providing support look like?
I think maybe it'd be supporting organizations like the National Alliance, you know, uh, being present to what that there's that group out there who, yeah, you may be saying to that guy who wears a Marine hat into the, store, and you thank him for his service, but you don't know what he's doing when he's outside. There's just an awareness. And I think a lot of people think, oh, the VA will handle that. Well, hell, they're so busy handling a lot of different things. It's just not happening. It's just the amount of people, I go to the VA because I got a little bit of stuff dealing with me as far as explosions, and so I wear hearing aids, and I got 10% disability. Well, there's guys in there that got, no legs, you know, and then there's all these ones that are out on the streets. I just, again, my focus is for veterans because I've lived that life and I want them to have the kind of opportunity I had that, came along with the Landmark Forum and then the support of a community and all of that. So it's just, and what Rod's done, that's why I wanted Rod on this with me, because I wouldn't have been able to reach as many people if there wasn't this connection and working with other people and getting, so one person's not going to make that kind of difference. It's going to take a tribe, so to speak. And that's what I think. I don't know.
I like to throw in the acronym TEAM. Together, everyone
Yeah.
achieves miracles. It takes a team. Another word for that I learned through the self-expression leadership program was community. And I'll just say that in the military, there is a community. You'll hear the phrase, got your back, got your six, whatever it is. They're comrades. They may compete. I'll razz Jan about being a Marine, and he'll come back to me and says, yeah, Army, that's ain't a real Marine yet. There's a competitiveness, but we would do anything for each other. Right. And that really is what community, I want to flash back. Seamus, you mentioned, since the beginning of time, if we take a look at our Native Americans here, the cultures that were here, when they trained a warrior, they trained him and they were on the other side of the river, right? Meaning they didn't live with the community. And as they came back, they do ceremony to cleanse and take it off. And Ed Tick wrote a book called War in the Soul, really, really good. And what he described is, he said, here's the ideal, is that imagine as a service member, veteran comes back from combat, that they've got a backpack and it's filled with rocks. In the Native American community, the community would each take a rock and own that for the rest of their lives, meaning lighten the load, and let that person know, we got your back. What do you need? Right? So that's an important piece. So, And when I first created Vets Meet Vets, the tagline was community keeps you connected. So being in community is so powerful and so needed, be it as military members leave the military, the umbilical cord is cut, right? They often do not associate, as Jan said, during that time, he'd get spit on and, but even the ones coming back now, they want to separate. They don't want to go visit the American Legion or the VFW or the VA. They want to, anyway.
Well, you created something I want to use as a segue, because I want to talk about Operation Veteran Freedom and all these workshops that you've offered over these years now. And one of the things about Landmark is that we're not a replacement. Our programs are not a replacement for a number of things. They don't replace therapy. They're not intended to replace therapy. They're not intended to be medical advice or any of that kind of stuff. People bring what's important to them into the programs. And Jan, you alluded to this, that in leading the programs, you found yourself paying extra attention at times to the people that were veterans. And you kind of a direct line from retiring as a Landmark Forum leader to making a difference with veterans. With your unique training, and for people that aren't familiar with Landmark, the Landmark Forum itself, kind of our kind of flagship course, is really about being able to put the past in the past in such a way that you really do have wide open possibilities in your future. And that's distinct from kind of stuffing it and overcoming it, and it's many things. But I think it'd be really beneficial to share a little bit about what the contribution that those ideas are making in your workshop.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we talk about is to complete your past. Be complete with it, not that your past disappears or it's not there, but it no longer has control of you. So like what you said, you get complete with your past, have that, be free from that. And then what? What's in the future? Well, based on our past, normally what we're looking for is something like what happened before. And we're also, going, well, if I do this, then this will happen. If I do this, then this will happen. And we're already predicting it, but where are we getting our predictions from is from the past. And it's about getting complete with that. And then you're left with nothing in the future but a creation. And that's the one thing that I loved about Landmark, is you actually start to get the tools to actually start to create a life from what? From nothing, that your past has no influence on, that you get to start anew. And that's the one thing that, if you've got that complete, yeah, that happened. Now, here I am now. What's that got to do with this person here, this moment now? Nothing. This is who I'm going to be now. Then you got your word, and then you start to cause, a future that wasn't going to happen. Because usually what we're doing and dealing with is we're trying to fix the stuff from the past and not do that again. But we keep bringing that along with us to make sure that we're not doing that. And we'll see it. There it is. Well, because we keep looking for proof to prove that we're right. But when you actually get to a place where you get complete, and then you're the author of your life, then you get to say how it goes. And that's the one thing about Landmark, is you actually are given so many distinctions you can bring to bear in different areas of your life. And then there's this whole new opening. And then, of course, we have different courses after that, like the advanced course and self-expression and leadership program. And, my biggest gift was, first of all, being free, and then creating that, who I am is my word, and I'm going to cause being powerful and effective and fully self-expressed. What does that look like? I don't know. I'll discover that and see and choose and create that. And that path led me. Go ahead.
Well, I'm you provoke something. You've led to veterans, and
Yeah.
I've been around many landmark forums in my role at Landmark, and I can think of, like, indelibly remember stories of veterans and how their participation in the forum allowed them to really put something in the past, to be able to let go of a guilt. I can think of one time,
Mhm.
there was an Iraq veteran who had the flu on the day that, like, five guys in his squad were killed.
Mhm.
And carrying that burden, it's hard to even imagine what that is like. And when he did the forum, he created for himself, as a way of really being able to, as you said, Jan, be able to deal with the now, what of the future, of reaching out to the parents of his squad mates who'd been killed and talk to them for the first time.
Mhm.
The survivor's guilt had him be terrified to talk to them.
Mhm.
And he was liberated by it.
Yeah.
And what's it like for you, to be able to contribute that kind of freedom to veterans with something, that, as you said, is really powerful?
Would you repeat that again? Something got in the way of my.
No, it's not a problem. There's a thing that came up on the screen here. Just bear with us a second. Uh, I think somebody wanted translation, so we go ahead. They're
Mhm.
taking advantage of that. Um, what's it like to be able to bring these distinctions directly to the veteran community?
It's fulfilling.
Mm,
Hmm.
very.
Uh, when we can make a difference, and somebody comes up to me after the workshop and says, "Thank you. I'm now free of that. I can see that, and I'm now present to something else." I mean, I think that's the biggest gift you can give anybody,
Hmm.
is to have them be free from their past and give them a future of all possibilities. So that's where I, get moved by it. I love it. I want to do it more. I want to do it in person because there's a whole different connection, I say, when you're right there and you can actually, somebody gets something or they're struggling with something, you can sense it and then you can actually address it versus on this, so to speak. I don't know what's going on with Kent or what's going on with, Desda, or what's going on with Bill, or, how they're feeling. We're human
Yeah,
beings and we're
yeah,
being together. So it makes a big difference. And I think that, the opportunity to give them an access to it. Now, we don't say this is final either. Lots of times we're saying, you want to go do this thing called the Landmark Forum to get complete. We want to give you an opening, a doorway, because 7 hours is much different than 3 days and an evening or
yeah,
2 days, whatever it is now. But that's one of the most extraordinary experiences to, you know, when we were at the JBLM prison, those guys getting lit up and excited. And then, like even calling their dad from uh, prison to talk to him about a tent that they gave him. And dad was saying, well, I'm not going to get in the tent. And they actually did one of the distinctions with him that they got in workshop. And the next day they called him, and his dad was free and was out in the tent.
hmm,
But dad was in the tent before, and he was back in wherever he was, Korea or someplace. but
Mm.
just that, and it's kind of like a tumble. You get them, one goes down, the next one goes down, the next one goes down, and it just spreads. And, the more we do this, the more difference it's going to make.
I'd
Yeah,
like to
you
also add that if it
please.
happens to the spouse, right? Here's the combat veteran and his wife. They have 6 kids. We've got one video with, we did it in Portland, Oregon, and there's a spouse that shared and how there's always been anger in the home and lost friends and all of that. And to hear her speak, on how that's transformed their lives, right? And so we always encourage that the significant other, even caregiver, is with the veteran as they experience Operation Veteran Freedom, and they're connected. They've got the same distinctions, and it's very powerful. And I'll kind of maybe give a little history too. When Jan first started, we said combat vets, combat vets. As we got to the prison, we realized there was a bunch of them that were not combat vets, but they're veterans. So we then said all veterans. And then we said, oh, but what about the families? So we said, okay, they're families. Now it's caregivers and providers and, I'll say significant people of influence in communities, that could bring us to like Aetna's headquarters in Hartford, Connecticut to teach the state police leadership and the military leadership that was there. It was awesome. Yeah. So the ripple effect that happens is huge.
There's another question I want to ask. You talked about there's combat veterans, but most veterans are not veterans of combat.
No.
And one of the things I've observed with my friends and family that have served is that intense experience of mission, being in a mission focused job. Often it's your first job and it's so mission focused, and then you're out and there's no
No mission.
we talk about this thing at Landmark that you the way people listen to you has a great deal to do with the degree of self-expression you have. And when there's nobody listening for what you're capable of or the contribution that you have to make, it can be a very jarring experience, particularly coming out of something where you had so much purpose and everything was clear. How do you see it? How do you see the workshop making a difference for people that are experiencing suddenly there's no mission, there's no objective to achieve?
Well, that's one of the things that we do talk about. What are you going to create? It's up to them. We don't know. We don't get it necessarily personal with them, but we invite them to actually invite people too. So, to expand that if you've got somebody that's struggling, what a difference would it make for you to have them come and be with us? And that's when we worked at the VA, Washington State VA, they were like pumped up about it. They wanted us to come and do that and then, get all these people in. And the difference that it made for some of the people who actually joined our group, and they started to have their friends do it. It started to get bigger that way. And it started to really cause an experience for them to see their friends or their family actually be free from their combat experience. So, that's why we grew for a long time until the pandemic.
COVID hit. Right.
Yeah.
But we were building Cottage Grove, Oregon, Portland, Vancouver. We were doing a lot of different places. And the VA, Washington State VA wanted us to do it. And we were starting to expand. They wanted us back at the prison. So, but then again, something happened and, we went to video.
Well, and a lot of, it's interesting. Landmark went to video in the pandemic as well. And,
Yeah.
there's different schools of thought, depending on who you talk to about, video isn't the same as being in person. And I think that's a very fair statement. And then there's
Mhm.
also video makes access possible that
Right.
wouldn't be
Yeah,
possible any other way.
that is
Um,
true.
do you find that you, as veterans, that you are listened to differently by other veterans? You know, there could be somebody as equally talented. You know, we have many people that, for example, lead the Landmark Forum. Your former colleagues, Jan. Is there something in the veteran experience that requires another veteran for people to be able to really uh, do the work to complete their past?
I don't think so. I
I,
think that may get them in the doors, more so in the door. You know, when we talk about it, Rod says the guy who leads this is a combat veteran from Vietnam, and he went through, a lot of different combat. So that's kind of like, oh, okay, well, maybe I want to go listen to what this guy has to say. But afterwards, it's kind of like, did the Landmark Forum leaders that had veterans in their workshop cause them to have breakthroughs? Hell yes, I'm
oh
one of
yes,
them.
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
And they weren't, so this work works. Let's put it that way.
Well, and I think it points to something else, which is, you know, thanking a veteran for their service is a safe, pleasant thing to do.
Hmm.
And at the same time, uh, I think I'm like many people. I don't feel like thanking somebody for their service is enough. Like I have something else that I could bring. I mean, my training, landmark leading programs, et cetera, is not really what I'm
Hmm.
referring to. It's more talking to people about their experiences doesn't require the prerequisite of having had those experiences. Listening
Correct.
to somebody who's been through something and letting them share their experience doesn't require having had that same experience. And I think maybe that's a little bit of a myth that, those of us that, you know, are, we're always civilians kind of might operate inside of. Like, it's not my place to talk about it with you. Anything you'd say about that?
Well, yeah. Well, leading the Landmark Forum, I don't know how many women that were in the forums with me that were brutalized or raped and had to deal with all that stuff. It never happened to me, but
Mm,
they got freedom. So, they didn't go, oh, well, they may get that, I don't understand what you went through, but I have an access to you being free of that.
yeah,
And so there's a lot of different things. A lot of people went through a lot of different things that were pretty horrific and that other people may not know about, like abuse or other things that happened in their lives, whether it be sexual or just physical, or maybe they went through diseases,
yeah,
and we didn't. But if you're coming from, I'm committed to this human being being free from the constraints of their past, and they have an access to these distinctions, going to make a difference. Now, they may walk in the door going, we had this happen in Baltimore. Uh, this black lady and her kid were sitting there in the, I don't know, back row almost, and she was shaking her head and shaking her head. And then I said, is there something you'd like to say? And she said, yeah, you're a white guy. What the heck do you think you know about my life? And I said, I don't know a damn thing, but give me a shot, And I was nice with her, and she was like, why didn't you get upset? And then at the end of the workshop, she was blown away.
mm,
So a black lady, I had I mean, all different kinds of people had all different things. What they want to do is that's what it takes. It takes, first of all, getting them there, to listen and to even start it. But coming from your commitment, they can feel it, they can hear it, they can, go along with it. And they may challenge it. And I had quite a few people do that. You don't know what my life was like. You're right. You lived your life. You're the only one that knows how your life went. Here's an opportunity to find out how you can be free from the constraints of that. But it does take something sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, does it
But
help
I
that,
mean, my takeaway from what you're saying is that you don't underestimate demonstrating that you actually care and
yeah,
want to know.
yeah.
Well, I have just a couple more questions before we, wrap up.
Mhm.
One is, and this may be opening up from what you've described. This may be a hard one to pick one, but one of the things that we found, or I found in interviewing people, is that through all of the challenges, the ups, the downs, the long hauls, the adaptations of pursuing a project, passion like this, is you're moved by what you're doing. And I would, just be really happy to hear from both of you what moves you about what you're doing.
When someone's freed up from their past, when they see something that they hadn't seen before, whatever that is, I get moved to tears,
Mhm.
just like now.
Yeah.
But I can show all my emotions and I don't have a problem with it. But to have somebody be free from the constraints of their past and have them be present to a world that they didn't know was possible is one of the most wonderful feelings, you know, and, I want that for everybody,
Mm.
whether they're a leader or whether they're somebody who supports leadership or the programs or National Alliance or whatever, out there. I'm not saying this is the answer, but when we all come together committed to making a difference for other people and doing whatever works, and and I put my heart into it,
Yeah.
and I want to make a difference. Now, because I don't know if there's any other kind of satisfaction when somebody comes and thanks you. I never thought I'd be free of that.
Mm.
Thank you for who you were being and the difference you've made.
Mm.
So it's a life worth living, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Jan. Rod,
Mhm.
what moves you about what you do?
So my military experience was military intelligence, teaching electronics, how to repair and that kind of stuff. And with it, as a teacher, which I also then taught Microsoft technology, when someone would get it, it's almost like this light switches on, right? You know what I mean? Like there's this aha moment that's over there, right? So when I see that, and I'm just so proud to have been with Jan for 83 workshops. Our next one will be number 84 next month. That we've seen that together and been able to create a safe place that our service members, veterans, and their families, can become free. Now, at the military prison, when we said Operation Veteran Freedom, the guards were back there with their M16s going, "Oh, they're not going to get free today," But immediately as we had more graduates, they kept saying, "When can the guards take this workshop?" Right? Meaning like it had transformed, from the chaplain and all the inmates that were there. Anyway, so when they get it, that's just so rewarding. I've never felt, I'll until God takes me home, I'll be teaching somehow, but not like my act from the advanced course was, I'm right and you're wrong. Like I tell you whether you asked it or not. And now it's being with people and just witnessing Jan, help another military veteran family or civilian family. And notice our logo. There's actually two arms there in that embrace. One's got camo and one doesn't.
Yeah.
So we are here.
And the other thing is that we make sure that the family's there.
Yeah.
By the way, they get breakthroughs. It's not, our work isn't about directed at just their military. And we tell them, you don't have to talk about your military at all. You just sit back and start to, see what you see. You don't have to share anything. You don't have to relive anything. But the difference, by the way, it makes a difference when their husband and wife are there and she doesn't know what how come mama, and then he's freed up. It gives her a whole different experience of being alive. But by the way, she got it too. And she got freed up, whatever she was dealing with. So when the family is then, and then they can have a conversation. That's why we wanted to bring in the families and the close people, even people who were caring for the person. We had quite a few of them. The nurses that were there, housekeepers.
Had you done, just use yourself as an example, Jan, had you had the distinctions of the Landmark Forum, how might that have affected your experience in Vietnam and coming home?
Well, it it really altered it. I mean, I actually went back to Vietnam, and I went back to the hill in which we're at the bottom of the hill in which we were overrun on the top when I said earlier that there was 100 of us on the hill and only 5 of us walked off. And, I had the opportunity to just, go into my head and say, okay, well, what would they say to me if they could talk? The men that died up there and the men that died shortly after. And 23 died that night, and I knew a lot of the other ones were in pretty horrible positions, but we didn't ever find out about them. But I, kind of went in my head and said, what would they say to me? Because I was being moved by it. I was impacted by it, saddened by it. And, and then listening to what I've done in this work, landmark education, and asked myself, what would they say? They'd say, McHenry, knock it off. Listen, dude, you want to honor us? Have an extraordinary life and make a difference. And my life altered. I actually went back to Dong Ha, Quang Tri, and there was the person who had taken us and driven us up to the Dong Ha and where I was at when I was talking about the hill. And he came back with us, and I actually was sharing with the other graduates that were there. And I said, what happened? And then I turned to him and I said, I wanted to, apologize about the war. It was kind of a stupid war and nobody really won. And, forgive me for what, may have happened to people in your life. And he looked at me and he said, I'm not going to forgive you. And I said, oh. And he said, no, just a minute. And he was kind of walking towards me. He said, here's why I can't forgive you. My dad fought on the North NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, and my uncle was on the South Vietnamese Army. And my uncle died in the army during that war. And I wasn't born yet, but when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my dad took me outside and he pointed to a mountain. He said, you see that hill up there? He said, look at all the luscious trees and stuff. He said, yeah. He said, at one time there was the South Vietnamese Army there and the North Vietnamese Army there, and there's a lot of men died up there on the hill. And yet the hill's still there. He said, son, that war was stupid. We didn't need to fight it. He said, why I can't forgive you is that there's nothing to forgive. And then he gave me a big hug. Altered my life fairy tale for the guilt and the shame of what things that happened there.
Mm.
So, it's, I don't know, did that answer your question?
Well, I want to ask one last question before we wrap up. And it's simple. What do you want people to say about you when you're no longer here? As Rod said, when God calls you home.
He cared.
Mm.
He really cared.
That's great. Yeah. And Rod, how about you?
I wasn't alone. He was with me.
Mm. That's great.
So we want every veteran to know you're not alone.
Yep.
Well, that's a perfect place to end this wonderful conversation. I really thank both of you for your service and your service to those who served. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.